One thing a lot of Westerners might be surprised to hear is the fact that India has a thriving queer community. Like, considering the fact that sexual acts between people of the same gender was only decriminalised in 2018, the year after I moved to the country, the community is rather vocal and well connected. In fact, that was one of the key ways Adita and I made connections when we first moved to Delhi, myself having come from the UK and Adita from West Bengal. And it's through that community that I first heard about today's story, involving a well-known news group that recently found itself in hot water for posting articles advocating conversion efforts as medical advice. So let's talk about that. Though before we can go ahead, I just need to give a content warning for the following topics: transphobia, homophobia, colonialism, attempted suicide, misogyny, child torture, medical violence, potential misgendering, and incest. If you like our work and appreciate the research put into each video, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. You can also support us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media like Twitter and Discord. New Delhi Television Ltd, or NDTV, is a news group started in 1984. In the decades since, it has continued to grow and even went on to launch India's very first 24/7 news channel. However, today's story is not one about success, but rather shame. For you see, NDTV found itself coming under heavy criticism for an article it was hosting in the medical section of its website, Dr. NDTV. The article, which was titled "How to Deal with My Daughter Who Behaves Like a Boy," was a Q&A in which an anonymous individual sent in a question that was answered by Dr. S Anandalakshmy, a former advisor on child development and education in Chennai. The question reads as,
I have a daughter, aged 15, who believes that she is a boy and behaves like one. Her physical growth is normal, but she is hyperactive and poor in her studies and highly disorderly in her day-to-day activities. She clings to me all the time and refuses to listen to anyone who tries to tell her to change her ways. Many a times it becomes difficult to contain her, both when she is happy as well as angry. She never mixes with girls of her age and likes to dress like boys. She has been a social embarrassment for me, due to which I have been avoiding social contacts. Please advise what is the remedy. How can I mend her ways and divert her attention to studies instead of her gender?
So before we move on to the doctor's answer, there are a couple of things we can extract from the question alone. The main one being the fact that I don't know if the person this is about is trans or not. Yes, the teen's mother is forwarding them as if they were a trans boy in her question, but without actually talking to the teen, there's no way of confirming that. Nothing the mother lists, such as their refusal to mix with girls their age, them dressing like boys, or their hyperactive behaviour are indicators that they consider themselves to be male. Expression does not translate to gender identity. Both cis and trans people should be allowed total freedom in how they express themselves, without that having an impact on said gender. The only thing that can actually tell you whether a person is male, female, neither, or some mix of both is the person themselves. Expression can be an early sign in young adolescents who lack the language to explain how they feel, but even then, 9 times out of 10 is just them exploring their interests. In fact, 84.2% of youth who are referred to gender identity clinics in the Netherlands by parents, teachers and school counsellors due to showing signs of gender variance, so them playing games or dressing in a manner not typically associated with their assigned gender, are assessed by a professional and yet receive no further support. Why? Well, because in spite of displaying signs of gender variance, they don't show signs of being trans. A distinction said professionals understand rather well. You see, researchers looking into these cases found key differences between trans youth and youth who simply don't conform to gendered norms. Differences that could be used as a means of diagnosis. Said differences were so effective, in fact, that 100% of the adolescents who were later put on fully reversible puberty blockers went on to medically transition. And just so we're clear, there is zero evidence that any of them hold any sort of regret. Now, of course, I'm not a trained psychologist, and even if I was, I don't have access to the teenager to form any sort of diagnosis. so I'm hesitant to label them a trans boy on the basis of the mother's misogynistic stereotypes. Yes, she states she believes her child thinks they're a boy, but considering the absolutely ludicrous association she draws between hyperactivity and masculinity, this is not someone whose word I can give any sort of merit. So I'd rather err on the side of caution, hence I'll be sticking with the gender-neutral they-them. With all that said, however, that doesn't make the doctor's answer any better. The advice given is still dangerous, whether or not the individual is a trans boy, cis girl, non-binary person, or agender. It also doesn't matter to the parents of trans youth or youth displaying gender-variant behaviour who are going to search queries like the title of this question and are likely to come across the article from what is presented as a medical authority. So with that made clear, let us move on to the doctor's answer, working paragraph by paragraph.
It is good that you have asked for some help with your daughter, at least now. I have heard of such problems when the child is 4 or 5 years old, but not after puberty. By 15 years, the female system would have attained maturity, and it is surprising that your daughter thinks that she is a boy, despite her own physiological functions and development. Perhaps a frank explanation of the male and female bodies with diagrams would be necessary.
First red flag. I have heard of such problems when the child is 4 or 5 years old, but not after puberty. Trans people are not a recent phenomenon. Yes, NDTV claims the article to be almost a decade old, but even if that is true, that's still not an excuse to be ignorant of our existence, especially for a developmental specialist living in India of all places. I mean, the Hijra and the Kinna communities, which have both trans and intersex members, are prevalent not only in Chennai, but all over India and in other parts of South Asia. This is particularly true of Delhi, where the doctor worked for more than a decade. In Delhi, you may as well flip a coin every time you catch a ride somewhere to figure out whether you'll see a member of the Hijra community at a traffic stop or outside a metro station. So it's pretty shocking for an Indian child developmental specialist to not know this, both on an academic and a cultural basis. As for a frank explanation of male and female bodies, all the cis people are doing here is telling on themselves. If a person's behaviour or gender were truly dependent on their physiological functions and development, as the doctor forwards, then there'd be no need to educate them to behave in a different way. What this tells us is that they're not really forwarding education, they're forwarding indoctrination. But it's about to get a whole lot worse due to the doctor's advice in the following paragraph.
She must see that she is a girl and accept the fact. If you feel hesitant to do this yourself, you should seek the help of a psychologist, counselor, or a psychiatrist to talk to the girl and to listen to her. If these categories of people are not available to you, get the help of a gentle and wise friend or aunt or teacher who will talk to the girl. Perhaps the family wanted a boy when she was born and she carries the memory of that and would like to be what they wanted. Or else she has a brother or cousin who gets more freedom than she does and she wants to be like him.
Dr. Anandalakshmy was a professional in child development, yet she asserts that the whims of the family during pregnancy could have magically impacted the child's development. This is a shocking display of academic incredulity and really shows just how little the doctor actually knows about the development of gender in children. There is no psychic link between a fetus and the family, and the fetus does not store the memories or emotions of even the host parent. This is just straight up pseudoscience designed to delegitimize what the teen is saying if the mother is to be believed. The same is true of the whole, well, perhaps they have a brother or cousin who gets more freedom than them and they want to be like him. Whilst this doesn't cross the line into all-out Wu-Town in the same way as, say, a psychic fetus, there is still zero basis for this Freudian-esque suggestion. The whole gender non-conforming child is secretly envious of their siblings is a barely altered version of boys are secretly jealous of their fathers because they want to fuck their mums, and girls are secretly jealous of every man because many of them lack an extended phallus. If the teen has actually told their mother that they are a man, then he's a man, and that's all there really is to it. The whole application of psychoanalysis to undermine a person's autonomy and self-declaration is one of the main reasons I have such a hard time taking the field seriously. That and the fact that almost everything about it cannot be supported by evidence. Whilst I appreciate that there is an unconscious level to human thought, I just have an issue with the way that so-called professionals exploit said idea as an excuse to concoct whatever wild fantasy they want about the person being discussed, especially when they haven't even talked to that person. Now, people might think I'm being a little harsh here, but the fact is, Dr. Anandalakshmy is using her position to advocate the torture of a teenager she has never met. When she tells the mother that she needs to force her child to accept the fact of her assigned gender, turning to a psychologist, counselor, or psychiatrist if she's unable to do so, that is the doctor advocating for gender identity conversion efforts, or GICEs. GICEs are a subset of a larger group of pseudoscientific methods, the proponents of which like to dishonestly label as reparative or conversion therapy methods they claim can change either a person's gender or sexuality. The reality, meanwhile, is much more horrifying. Not only has said methods never been shown to change anyone's gender or sexuality, with the most they've ever been shown to do is force a person back into the closet, but they do so by psychologically torturing the individual. The methods are so psychologically destructive that the percentage of trans and non-binary youth who have attempted suicide within the past year increases from around 8% to a whopping 57% in individuals who have been exposed to such practices. That is what Dr. Anandalakshmy is encouraging in her answer. Meanwhile, medical institutions such as the UK Council for Psychotherapy, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, and the US Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration all denounce such efforts as a violation of medical ethics. This is not a joke, and thankfully parts of India are starting to recognise that. Back in June, the Madras High Court of Chennai published a 107-page report compiled by Justice N Anand Venkatesh, which condemned the horrors of conversion efforts and declared that it was the state's responsibility to prohibit the practice. And as outlined in the report, any medical practitioner found to be engaging in said pseudoscience would face consequences, including having their medical licenses revoked. Though it didn't stop there. Literally 2 days before recording this, on the 31st of August, Justice N Anand Venkatesh issued an order from the Madras High Court, setting this as legal precedent across the entirety of India unless challenged. Points 13 through 16 of the order not only detail the damaging and unscientific nature of the practice, but demand both the National Medical Commission and Indian Psychiatric Association file a report on how they are going to tackle the issue. However, the shit show continues, with the doctor continuing to show just how little she actually understands the topic.
In your letter, you have not mentioned the other members in the family and household. All of them will have a direct or indirect effect on her thinking. So it may be good to get their cooperation rather than act as if it is a secret that one should suppress. All people have both male and female hormones. It is the dominance of one set that actually determines the gender. Some people may have been born with near equal amounts of male and female hormones and hence have some confusion about their sex role. After you have consulted a doctor and a psychologist, it may be necessary to see a specialist in endocrinology who can also assist her system with the required supplements.
This part makes this whole ordeal particularly frustrating since, yes, all people have both testosterone and estrogen. That's something not a lot of people know, and I usually have to spend time pointing out when I explain what an intersex person is. However, at the same time, the doctor incorrectly labels them male and female hormones and presents them as a possible cause for the teen's behaviour. This, of course, is more pseudoscience known as gender essentialism, the belief that the various sexual characteristics dictate an individual's likes and interests. This is refuted by the entirety of human history, with many things that were once considered inherently masculine in one period or culture being seen as feminine in another, and vice versa. Sure, things like hormones can have an impact on a person's behaviour, but not in a way in which the outcome is predictable or related to societal expectations of gender. I can't, say, inject a cis man with estrogen and expect him to act more feminine, for example. He might experience mood swings as his body adjusts to its new hormonal balance, but that's probably about it from a behavioural perspective. As for putting the teen on HRT to cure their behaviour, holy shit, that is an absolutely horrific suggestion. To actually medicalize a child, not because said medicine is life-saving, but because the child's presentation is inconvenient to the parents, is absolutely ghoulish in nature. It really goes to show that the concerns about teens being put on HRT for gender dysphoria are total crap, since doctors are willing to suggest the same in an attempt to turn a person cisgender. The last thing I want to discuss on this section is how Dr. Anandalakshmy asserts that the rest of the family will have a direct or indirect impact on the teen's thinking, because I feel like it, along with the psychic fetus idea, really speaks to just how self-absorbed cis people are. Because if you're a cis person and you're watching this, wondering if you're the reason a member of your family is trans, then I urge you to please get the fuck over yourself. Like, seriously, not everything is about you. And again, part of me worries that this is going to come off a little confrontational, like I'm being mean for no reason, but I'm honestly tired of cis people trying to make the trans experience part of the cis world. Our lives are not dictated by yours. We're not window decorations in your little story. We're fully autonomous people who exist separate from you. Trans people are trans because being trans is a part of natural human diversity. So please, learn to respect that fact and stop trying to make our lives about you. So, with that made clear, let's carry on with the remainder of the article.
Once she accepts that she is female in her body and has to behave appropriately in society, let her take up sports and outdoor activities that satisfy her. Do not force her into needlework and cooking if she is not interested. Give her emotional support as she adjusts to the new advice. Encourage her and give her help to do well in her studies, because that is the only sure way that she can have a career after her education is completed. Let the girl's father also join you in the plans you make for her. All the best.
This is infuriating as it shows how allowances can be made so long as the teen is thought to no longer perceive themselves as trans, if they did to begin with. Nobody can look at this paragraph and argue that everything else was just some old Indian woman pushing toxic stereotypes, since she demonstrated clearly that those stereotypes can be bent, if not removed completely. So the issue isn't acting outside of gendered norms, it's the perception that the teen is trans and that being trans is something which needs to be fixed. Rather naturally, this caused quite a stir in the Indian queer community, with a number of folk taking to social media platforms such as Twitter to air their concerns. Said post received enough attention that NDTV took to responding to several of them with, quote, "We strongly disagree with the opinions of the person who answered this query 10 years ago. The response is being permanently deleted from our archives." End quote. That right there is not an apology, let alone an actual resolution. But don't take my word for it, allow me to read part of a post by human rights activist, vegan and trans voice, Doel Rakshit, she, her, the same post that actually alerted me to the whole situation.
Now, my question is, what about the damage that has been done over these 10 years? Is there any data of how many kids whose lives have been turned into living hell by their parents after being influenced by this article? Is a public declaration stating, "We strongly disagree," without even once apologizing for their actions enough? Is permanently deleting it from their archives enough? Where is the assurance? Where is the constructive compensation and a declaration of a way forward to avoid enabling such evils in the future? Media houses and brands taking accountability and ownership of their wrong actions is a necessary first step, but it is never enough when we are dealing with sensitive issues like this.
Yet it somehow manages to get worse than that. Why? Well, because this hollow response was posted to everyone who raised the issue, including Twitter user Anandita, they, them, someone who had pointed out one very important fact that a lot of others had missed. It wasn't the one article. There were at least two more, one dealing with a 3-year-old and another with a 6-year-old. Now, I was able to gain access to the one involving the 6-year-old by reaching out to Anandita, and whilst Dr. Anandalakshmy does take a somewhat softer stance with the younger child, she still encourages the parents to seek out counsellors if their variants persist as they grow older. And whilst I'd love to think that the doctor was advising this in the child's interest, their article on the 15-year-old leads me to believe otherwise. But what's more important to the way in which NDTV responded is the fact that, in spite of Anandita having pointed out the existence of all 3 articles in their original post, the other 2 remained up until after Anandita called out the fact that NDTV had only deleted the one. This is revealing as it shows how NDTV wasn't actually reading the criticism it was receiving, it only read enough in order to come up with a copy-paste response that not only shirked all responsibility for its actions, but failed to address the larger issue. These aren't the actions of a group genuinely concerned about what it had posted, these are the actions of a brand looking to distance itself from public criticism. Now, one thing I haven't talked much about throughout this video is the doctor responsible for all 3 of these articles, Dr. S Anandalakshmy. The reason being the doctor is no longer with us, having passed away on the 13th of March 2019, making this one of those difficult situations to deal with, at least in regards to her actions. NDTV, of course, have their own separate responsibility, which is vital to talk about. But what justice is there to be sought when it comes to Dr. Anandalakshmy? She was very clearly a beloved person who helped a lot of people, but at the same time she was openly spreading pseudoscience as a means of justifying the very real torture of an entire demographic. She may not have understood those to be the consequences of her actions, but as a doctor who worked in the field of child development, a field where this information is readily available, it was very much her job to know. And if she didn't know and didn't care to find out, then she should have refused to speak on the matter, rather than speaking with authority, risking potential harm. It really is a reminder that, as educators, anyone with a platform should keep in mind the facts that they not only have the right to say, "I don't know," but the responsibility to do so when applicable. Nobody is expecting anyone to know everything, but it's on you as a perceived authority to know when to speak and when to refuse to. As for what this entire thing shows insofar as to India's progress when it comes to achieving queer equality, it is a good sign that the articles were removed relatively quickly, even if NDTV was a bit of a bastard about the entire thing in refusing to accept any responsibility. I mean, compare that to, say, the response to the Irish Times, which very recently published a repugnantly transphobic article condemning a bill to ban conversion efforts in the Republic of Ireland, similar to the ruling passed by the Madras High Court in Chennai, and we can see the difference. Sadly, those of us from the West tend to think of rights movements as this very linear progression, modelled after our own history, when places like India completely demolished that notion. Yes, they only decriminalised sexual acts between same-gender partners 2 years ago, but states like Chennai are also ahead of many European countries and US states. And I think that's an important thing to point out now and then, as it challenges this very Eurocentric notion of social superiority. That and the fact that the only reason they had to decriminalise same-gender acts was because we, the British, outlawed them in the first place. So, yeah, that one's on us. I'd just like to end this video by giving thanks to both Doel and Anandita. Doel for alerting me to this case to begin with and giving me permission to share her thoughts, and Anandita for exposing the other articles and trawling through their history to find the link. You can find links to Doel's Instagram and Anandita's Twitter down below. I'd also like to thank my wife, Adita, for offering her cultural insight. Anyway, I'd love to get all your thoughts on the case. What do you think? Was NDTV's response enough? Do news groups have a responsibility for what they post to their medical sections, or does that fall on the people answering? Why do so many experts have a problem when it comes to refusing to speak on topics they're very clearly not versed on? Did I miss anything you noticed? If so, let me know in the comments down below. Just know that abuse won't make it through. If you like what we do here, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make all this possible. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Hannah Banghart, Gert Van Voorst, Sora and Katie, Cthulhu, and Sosh Daniels. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.